What's up, Matt?
I'm good. How are you, Hassan?
Good. It's been a long week, but a fun one.
It's been a long week. It's been a longer time since we did a catch up with the community.
It has been.
Yeah.
I think I'm excited for us to get a chance to reflect and be able to bring in the community and a lot of the learning that has been happening as well. And I think this will be a fun way to just share what's new at 4.0.
Yeah. I also think there will be a contest the whole way to see if and when one of us grabs the mic and starts singing into it like we're owning the room.
I've been thinking about it.
I'm thinking about it the whole time. It's like the marshmallow test. Okay.
So I have some questions for you, Matt.
All right.
Let me start with the first one.
Fire.
What did you learn from Sabbatical?
I learned a lot. So one, I learned how grateful I am to have 4.0 as a community. Like it was, you and I and the board spent about almost a year and a half. And if it's me and Alex, our board chair, it was 2 years planning, talking about that, saying to the board, I'm a founder. And for the first time in 7 years, I've got a team that I think can run the day-to-day without me. And you as a thought partner, someone who's tightly aligned with me on what we're doing, like I'm really excited to say, I want to see what it feels like for the organization to not have me. And so for me, one of these the number one takeaway was just profound gratitude to the board that they let me take this and take that risk on the organization. Turns out it's not much of a risk because you and the team kick butt at running the organization. We all knew that. But I think I'm just grateful for the intentionality of that time. You and I spent 6 months meeting once a week, an extra meeting. We already met once a week on day-to-day, but we spent quality time for 6 months just preparing for that. And it's just, that is where the sabbatical actually began for me emotionally, because I began to step back and say, this is going to be your responsibility while I'm gone. And I need to start unpacking. Where am I in the business? Where am I too in the weeds? Where am I slacking off? Where am I not paying attention? What skills do you need to build? So that's number one, just like profound gratitude to you for wanting to step up, to the team. Like everyone stepped up. And it wasn't just this step up and make sure the ship doesn't, run aground. It was, I came back to a whole nother view of where the organization could go. And we'll talk more about that, I hope. But like it was starting to see, it's like a journal and it's all my handwriting. And then I come back and I read your entries in the journal. And it's like, this story is getting more interesting. And so it wasn't a story of like, a fear of things not going right. It was, wow, this story gets more interesting when you let go and you let more people participate. That's one. Two was quality time with my kids and feeling this just profound switch from a world where my kids fit into the adult schedule to where my wife and I fit into theirs. And that was really fun. So we spent 5 months in South America. The first month was in Bariloche, Argentina. We all walked to school together and went to this small like backpackers Spanish school. And when our family of 5 rolled up on them, they were like, yeah, okay, sure, we can figure this out. And they admitted at the end of the month that this was kind of hard to pull off 3 kids who had a variety of Spanish levels, and we had a variety of Spanish levels. So we bonded with them, but it was glorious to be able to say, our days are going to be rooted in what the kids need. So surprises. They needed a week of structure. They like structure in a way that I forgot. And I think my wife, Virginia, who is also a teacher, came up with the idea that we would, when we got to the south of the continent, we would talk about with the kids and start to study the relationship between the colonial European culture and the indigenous population in each spot we went. So we started reading a book about Yagan, native of the Tierra del Fuego, the very bottom of the continent in Argentina and Chile, and how he was taken by Fitzroy, who was carrying Darwin on one of his trips where he was starting to develop his first theories of evolution. They brought him back to Europe, tried to, make him European and culturize him and bring him back to his people. and show them the benefits of European culture, to civilize him. And so that story, this beautiful illustrated story, set off a journey as we moved up the continent of studying the interaction between white colonizers and native peoples. And I was blown away personally by how this experience of whiteness and colonial power and abuse through a totally different context, but all the same powers that are at the core of structural racism, at the core of our own country's version of not only attacking, wiping out, and erasing the indigenous heritage and community, but also slave trade and our original sin as a country. It was, to me, a very profound experience to sort of see my own privilege and whiteness, the same core injustice, just manifests in a very different context. That continued to play out for me. Two books that I read. Eduardo Galeano, who is a Uruguayan author, wrote a book called The Open Veins of Latin America, and the subtitle was 500 Years of the Pillage of a Continent. And he crafts this amazing narrative of how first Spanish and Portuguese, later other Europeans like the English, and in modern times our country have pillaged that continent and are still pillaging it. And I continue to consider that the most profound read of the trip. I also read Michael Eric Dyson's Tears We Cannot Stop, which is sort of from his perspective as a pastor writing to white Americans about what racism and being black in America feels like. And it was a very powerful read, and he had this fascinating chapter on specific things white folks can do to start opening their own eyes, doing their work. And that's now in my own personal canon of just things I'm trying to use to guide me as I do my own work. So that's a long-winded answer, but it was 5 months, so I get to answer that with a big, long answer. But I came back just so much more curious about what this next chapter that you started to write while I was gone will look like. And I started to really go to another layer in my own personal journey. What is the story of 4.0 being accessible? What is the story of 4.0 structurally pushing back on all of these systems, which are so well engineered, regardless of the continent, to keep people apart, to keep people oppressed, and to keep power structures the way they are? So it was more than I could ever have expected, and I feel this obligation to take that learning back and just bring it into what we're doing day to day and just do my part to participate in creating the community that I think when we close our eyes, we see.
Yeah. It's really, really helpful. I've heard you reflect on that learning a lot, and it's always just really, really helpful to hear you, as even distance, and time elapses, how you continue to reflect on that. This wasn't in the script, but hey, this is the benefit of long form. I'm really curious, like as an opportunity for you to just also share, like as a parent, how did the experience influence your view of what schooling could look like, and as a parent, and also like how has it changed your hopes, your dreams for your children?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think the things that are coming to mind are big surprises on the trip. We spent a week in Punta Arenas, which is a town on the Magellan Strait, and we spent that week not really knowing what to do, and we were kind of pouting because we were there. We were waiting for this really amazing glacier trip through the fjords of Tierra del Fuego, and as far as parents, we were like, oh man, we're going to have to fill this week with some teaching. Maybe we'll get some more math done. The kids were doing self-directed work on Khan Academy and a few other web-based platforms. And so the idea was, we'll make it up when we get there. And we went through a museum that sort of talked about the colonizers. It glorified the European families that came through and wiped out the native populations, put herds of sheep and cattle that they then sold the meat back to Europe from. And, we talked to a couple locals at lunch a few days later, and they were like, yeah, man, that is a crazy story of whitewashing in that museum. And Virginia said, tell me more. I kind of missed that. So we went back to that museum with the kids and started to just interrogate what was presented to us. And it's embarrassing that it took so much time for us to sort of acknowledge it and say, well, damn, this is, when you really stop and read it, this is a ridiculous story. This is an incredibly one-sided story about what happened here. And for me, there were moments in that week where the kids started to ask the question, like, why was Fitzroy such a butthead? That was the 8-year-old word for it. And why did they do that? And they started to understand, like, why is the straight was already there, but it's named for the European who discovered it. And so they were watching them unpack this and start to say, like, well, but he didn't discover it because the people that we have been studying, they were here first. And so that was very profound for me. And I think so often as parents, we don't have time to say, to be there with them when they're interrogating, when those lights are starting, those things are starting to go off in their head. And it was disorienting because I think we tend to assume that, like, it's a consumer-based experience. Our job as parents is to choose the best school, hope we did a good job, and if it's not good, we'll either switch it or we'll advocate or we'll patch it together. And to me, that was just the glorious gift of this space, was I could be there with my children as they were starting to make these connections. And so that to me is like, I'm so hungry for that as a parent now. And I realize how rare those moments are. And so that to me is just, how do we continue to push on the idea that school is not institutional? It is relational, and it is these moments. That's a very sort of cliche take on it, but it's so about the relational fabric of our known experience and the edges of our network when we push out beyond what we know to ask questions about other humans. And that was amazing. And I think there's so little vocabulary, good habits, context, structure out there to do that on a regular basis. I miss it. I miss those moments.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that reflection, Matt. And when it resonates with kind of the reflections that I had during that time as well, as I kind of stepped into this leadership role during that sabbatical period. My first reflection is absolutely gratitude to the team, to you, to the board. But really, like, the team, recognizing how important it is to have a community around you that has your back and that I trust to be able to be forgiving to me and to share the lift of running this organization with me. So that same level of just like profound gratitude is absolutely kind of the first thing that comes to mind, and how it's important to just it's something that I'll just never forget in my kind of like leadership journey, is the importance of investing in developing the team around you, and how they can help strengthen the fabric of the organization beyond one person. The second for me is just how leadership is a crash course in like self-awareness. You know? Yeah. I mean, like, I talk to you about this a lot, but like I've quickly found myself in this place where 100% of the decisions that I make are decisions that I feel way less than 100% confident about. And that was just, it happened like immediately, and it was just really helpful in those moments to like I couldn't rely on data, and as an engineer, like that's been a lot of what okay, I need the information. If I have the information, I can make the right decision. And I quickly find myself in this place where for almost all of the decisions, I won't have perfect information, and that it's going to come back to like what values do I have, and more importantly, the tension. How do I want to balance the tension between those values, because it's never that clear either when it comes to what is considered values-based leadership. So one shout out to Pahara Next Gen, because they've been an amazing an amazing professional development opportunity that is focused exactly on this of the concept of leading through values tensions. And thanks to you for referring me to that community. And it's just been, again, like a constant reflection and seeing value in reflecting on what my own story and how I can lead from that place of authenticity. So, for me, it was like reflecting on my story as an immigrant and my dad's story as an immigrant, and how, my experience is very much defined by, up to this point, has been defined by luck. Again, like I think a lot of the team knows, and a lot of the folks in the community know that the only reason I came to the United States was because I won the immigration lottery. And, I was able to just the more I reflected on my personal journey and my personal story, the more I was able to talk about 4.0 from just a different place of credibility, which is I'm hungry to be in this place where we can freedom could be a product of design and intention than luck, which is what I've experienced, and I think what a lot of people have experienced. And then the second is just as an African, coming in from a community, from a country that is so rich in resources, but often where basically those resources were not governed by the people of that country. Just reflecting on how self-determination and being able to have communities share and govern their own resources, how deeply I held that value. And now I'm able, it allowed me to honestly see more clearly this vision that we're taking the organization toward, where, the alumni are driving the work, and we're building up the capital in the community. We're helping our alumni grow their social capital, their financial capital, their human capital for their organizations, and then continuing to create authentic avenues for them to reinvest that capital in the community. I just see that now from a different lens, and can have it be congruent to my own values and stories, which has helped me become a better leader as well. So
can I ask you a question?
Please. Yeah.
So, I do see the organization making a turn. And the turn that I think as you and I start getting reps in describing it, one of the elements of that turn are, owning our role as an investor, and typically the first investor in many of the people we'll meet. And so there is an access and an equity value, those two values at play, and specifically equity and transparency, two new values that we've added. And I think it is, the transparency of being vocal about the fact that currently both philanthropy and private investing are stacked too far away from where many people want that capital to be. And so being more accessible and bringing not just capital, but all the other features, coaching the community, and the specifics of how we invest. It's not just writing checks. That is part of it. So, to me, that's one big theme that I hope you and I can keep unpacking. But there's another element of the turn is what you just described, and this came to life during the sabbatical. This idea that we will devolve power, share power, redistribute power and authority, responsibility for the day-to-day work of coaching and investing from our staff to the alumni that have specifically most recently come through. Like, I find it a remarkable just testament to how strong you are as a leader and your ability to do the day-to-day and keep things running, and simultaneously make this double down in asking alumni for more and more support and trusting more and more of the business to them. I mean, today, 100% of our coaching is done by alums. This has always been your vision when you first were the director of investing, but this has now come to life. And the biggest leap we made was while I was gone on sabbatical. Like, talk me through that. How did you, how has that come to life? Were there any big moments for you in making that? You know, how did you sell that to the team? Because that's a tough thing for the team, because it's like, this is 3 or 4 people that are not going to be hired at 4.0. Right. And over the long haul, that might represent roles that aren't going to be relevant anymore. Mm-hmm. As we continue to ask alums to do more, that might mean that our staff gets smaller, which can be it's kind of a tough convo.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So unpack that for me a little, because I wasn't here as you did that, and I think it was amazing, and it is maybe one of the most distinguishing features if someone looks back at the first 10 years of the organization. Going to 100% coaching by alums could be one of the most interesting things we've ever done. And I'm just interested, like, things that you haven't shared before or that people might not know about as far as that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if we kind of step back and look at, you know, if 4.0 was a box and we're trying to like double click on that box to see what it is that we do here, it boils down to kind of the basic things that any incubator or any investment shop would do, which is first recruiting or sourcing talent, 2 selection or diligence, 3 basically coaching and connecting the community, and 4th evaluation or what I guess in the investment world would be considered like an exit. And you know, so first as an engineer, that was always kind of like my framework. It's just like, if we're gonna get better as an organization, it means we need to get better and better and better at doing at our core competencies, which are these things, and like contextualize them in our current in the industry that we work in this stage of investments that we work in, and I think. The first thing I want to name on this strategy of doing more of the work by alumni is that it happened organically. It was already emergent. So when we looked, there was just a moment when, you know, as we were reflecting on our best recruiting campaigns, it was the referrals. It was people who were like, you know, referred by other members of our alumni community. When we looked at, like, you know, I used to be one of the staff who used to do all of the coaching, and I think I was all right, you know. But honestly, like, the best coaching experiences that fellows used to talk about were the informal coaching experiences that they would have at Bittersweet or at, you know, Captival at the time, or at or just like at happy hours, like the type of experiences, the type of skill exchange that fellows would talk about was just at a totally different level. And those were alumni and fellows who were just having these organic, meaningful relationships, coaching relationships and mentoring relationships. And again, it was you know, if I reflect on my own experience when I was launching my own organization 4 years ago, it was people like Nicole Jarbo, who would again just grab a drink with me and coach me informally. So I say all of that because a lot of what we've been doing was just like noticing, you know, and just doubling down and investing in those organic relationships that were already happening in the community. And I am really, really proud of the work that we have been doing over the last 6 months to really like 2 years, where now, you know, in this latest group, as we've onboarded 120 fellows, 80 in Essentials and 40 at Tiny, we simultaneously onboarded 34 alumni who are all amazing leaders, CEOs, executive directors of their own organizations who are also coming back and just delivering all of the coaching and delivering it orders of magnitude better. And again, I think that is a more organic model that could lead us to what I think could be a strong community that, again, continues to grow its capital and reinvest its capital back.
So can I ask you to tell the story of the staff side of it breaking? Because I remember I remember a season of Tiny when you and Austin just like went to the wall and were doing it all yourself. So I think there was this, the other side of that was we hit our limit as a staff. Like, describe how that went, and then I thought it was so interesting how the two of you reacted to that and unpacked it and said, all right, we tried that, we broke it.
Right.
And I think there was an intention. We were talking about like how hard can we go?
Right.
But I think if I look back on that, and y'all answered it, so we went as hard as we can go. This is as many teams as we can run through, and we broke the staff only model. Right. Like unpack that side of it a little bit, because that made you hungry for this organic experimentation that I think y'all set in motion.
Absolutely. So, the other framework that I think we were looking at as we were looking to improve essentials and Tiny, in addition to kind of like naming those 4 competencies, is also just like defining a vision for what kind of investor we want to be. And you and I were kind of just talking about it actually right before this recording. But we were talking about like what is it, how might 4.0 become the most accessible, the most diverse, and the most rigorous investor at the stage that we work in, and each of those 3 is related but separate but different, right? Like we wanted more people to access investing at the stage that we talk about. That if somebody is able with an idea for a dating app can just go with that idea and raise thousands of dollars, somebody with an idea for a school should too. And in many ways, I think maybe more. So we want more people to have access to capital to be able to get their ideas off the ground. Second, we wanted that community to be diverse in every possible form. Diversity in the regions, the cities that they live in, diversity in the ideas, the themes that they work on, and diversity in social identities that we all share and differ from. And honestly, like as we kind of got clear about those three elements of the vision that we were pursuing, it was just impossible to do it with a staff of 10, let alone 2 people who were running Tiny at the time. So I think this is again the other benefit and of this commitment that we are making with the organization is in our pursuit to continue to bring more capital earlier and make sure that it's distributed more equitably and in a more with high quality and rigor. We needed to have a strategy that it brings in more people and more expertise into the fold. So that has been amazing. And again, I have to also talk about obviously the trade-offs of it. So, it's easier to manage 10 people than to manage 40.
Right.
And we're absolutely learning that from like the tactical, like what does it mean to, like how do we, process 40 plus invoices every month.
You don't see them every day.
Right.
They're running an organization that you actually want them to be awesome at.
Exactly.
So why did you create this tension with them to work for you and they do that? Like
exactly. And then also just like how do you grow them? So like if these were full-time staff, we would invest in professional development, right? We would want to invest in them becoming better coaches, invest in them becoming better investors. Being able to come up with a professional development program that is again decentralized and lightweight is a challenge that we're one worth taking.
Yeah. So talk a little bit. Well, let's go deeper into this. When you say the goals are be the most accessible, be the most diverse, and be the most rigorous, I think that these are starting to animate this new vision of 4.0 as investor. To me, there's a lot of irony in that, because I think the earlier years we weren't thinking about those three things. I think success for us, and there's nothing wrong with this vision, it's just a different vision. The original vision was we've got to get people to the next stage of capital, mostly because the majority of our founders had quit their jobs when they were coming through our program, and we felt accountable to getting them to a place where they could feed their families and pay their rent. And so the financial stability and the urgency to get them cash flow, deal flow, revenue, even profitability, those were huge for us. And I remember the anxiety that we felt in bringing people into this program and saying, we will feel accountable with you. Maybe not 100%, but we feel that weight. And those three things were not what you couldn't describe what we were doing then. It was defined, success was getting to the next thing. And I think for me, unpacking that has been humbling, because I realized how so much of that particular game was therefore defined by the people downstream. And so for example, venture capital is a great source of capital to scale your business. And the basic value proposition is, as soon as I give you money, then your role and your influence as a founder diminishes. The institution is suddenly set in tension with the entrepreneur who founded it. And that it starts an inevitable cycle of separating the humans who started it from the scaling organization that will then enrich those investors. Again, there's nothing, this is not about the good and bad of capitalism, but it is, I'm reflecting on it because I was not interrogating that and saying, you know what, I have basically outsourced the values of the folks that we want to get you to the money for our own. And so to me, what I'm excited about too is another detail that I think when we did the summit update in 2017, and even when we were talking at the Sabbatical, we were mostly there on this idea, but I don't think we were as committed as we are now to the idea that the context within which we want you to be and your life stage is not having quit your job. And I think that just feels so much more aligned for me, right? That we can be more accessible. The ideas that we get to source and you get to experience when you're here are that much more interesting and diverse. We can serve a greater geography because we don't have to obsess about the political winds of a particular city's charter movement or the reform momentum or how much philanthropy is there or whether, what the political landscape looks like. Our stuff can happen in a community regardless of all that. It's under a lot of those radar. And then the rigor too is like we can be rigorous about these small pilots, about the science of innovation without you having to quit your job. And to me, that's been a huge thing that I think we probably can maybe just take a minute to step back and reflect on. But like, what are your thoughts on that? How has like really leaning into that particular element of the design, how has that changed things for you? Because when you started as the director of investments, that's not where we were.
Totally. And
you've gone through a bunch of iterations. Can unpack that a little?
Yeah, happy to. I think, again, all of these are interesting lessons with the benefit of hindsight, because I think a lot of these are, again, like things that some of it were hypotheses that we were testing and we were just learning as we were going, and some of them were just like noticing, right? Like, okay, there's something happening there. Let's pay attention and let's invest in it more intentionally. And I mean, I would go even further to like launch cohort 7, which is where the one that I participated in. And at the time, the experience for me was moved to New Orleans. I was living in Boston at the time. Basically, dedicate yourself for at least a month for the opportunity to participate in the program. And I remember, like, at the time, it was just like, it's now or never. Like it was like that mindset, which is just like, I'm single, I'm young, was just like leaving. I had some, savings from working in the consulting industry, and it was just like, I would not be able to do this at a different time, and like that was the mindset for me. It was just like, I need to do it now, if I'm ever gonna do something like that. And I don't think I like fully understood and reflected on like, what's the implications of a system that that you can only participate in, again, if you're young, single, and like have some cash saved, and I, now I can look back and reflect on it, like it was a pretty non-diverse room, right? So I think like that was a structural, just like that was a design that was flawed, that was working perfectly. It got the right person based on that design into the room, but it was incongruent with like the values that I think like many of us have for what schooling could look like. And the second design element that I think we've talked about up to this point as well was the like just capital is not distributed early in education. So again, like I actually look at like Y Combinator, and they just recently added in their blog post how they increased the amount of money that they give to their founders. And in that blog post, they were talking about like the goal of giving you money is so that you don't fundraise. We don't want you to waste your time fundraising at this stage. And what we want you to do is to actually build your company. And I wish there was more people willing to give hundreds of thousands of dollars to say, I want you to like really think about what the next school, the next learning program could look like. But there just isn't, right? Like that is just the design of the current system we're in. So again, like this move organizationally that we've done to, one, remove the requirement to quit your job, which all of a sudden, right, just allowed many more people, I should say actually invited and it just encouraged many more people to like say, maybe now is a good time for me too, and it also I think plays to this concept that Y Combinator is talking about, which is, if I have a job, then I don't have to like, this idea doesn't have to work, like I'll be fine, if I can try it at a really, really small level with a very, very controlled risk, and I don't have to spend my time thinking about how I can pay my bills, which is a real thing, to worry about. So I think that's now with the benefit of hindsight looking back, like I think that decision organizationally to say we are going to remove the requirement to move and to quit your job, and I think the next step that I think we need to take, which is we highly encourage you to not quit your job and actually to stay in your community, because that's where you can make that's where you can learn the most. We're able to actually push back on those two flawed designs in the investment ecosystem in education.
I think one thing that you made me think of, as you mentioned, like, Launch 7 looked the way it did for the purposes, and I think we've since interrogated. Brianna's done a really amazing job making this a feature of how we recruit, and every wave she'll interrogate, and then right now she's in the process of asking the people that didn't get in, and that to me is such an interesting twist too. Like, I remember early days, like even pre your cohort, I used to brag about how selective our program was. I mean, there was literally a slide that said, here's how selective Harvard undergrad is, and we're just as selective. Remember that slide? And so,
I
like,
liked it at the time.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that is such a seductive way to think about this stuff, and it is such a lazy way. It's a lack of interrogating what you're doing. You're perpetuating the reality that entrepreneurship is a privileged game.
Right.
That it is not coincidence. It is designed for, and if you don't interrogate it, it is not powerful enough to push back on structural inequality and structural racism and the things that have put power in the hands of the people who have it and have disenfranchised those that don't. And I think that's humbling when you look back and just ask that basic question of whether or not, your life as someone who thinks he's trying to fix the system has actually been a lot of maintaining it. Mm-hmm. And I think to me, that's what's so interesting now is little details that can just send shockwaves through the way we do things are now changing it. Like that we're at 100% coaching, there are so many little moments like that where people on the team were able to step up and say, I'm going to interrogate this thing. Right. Bree's interrogating that with our outreach. And so she's more curious about the apps that didn't make it in than the apps that did. She would never write a slide about how exclusive our program is. To the contrary, right. It is, where is it not accessible?
Exactly.
And I'm great. Yeah, I'm so grateful for her advocating that is the only way we can be, because that is our work, is to make this more accessible. And for me, that's exciting to say we can define the this now, that investing, being the first money in to someone in their career as an innovator, that has to be accessible.
Yeah, and I'll build on that on the back end as well. So now where we are right now is we are seeing more founders, period, more diverse founders, period.
Yeah.
And more diverse part of doing and like telling credible stories of what the future of school could look like through the pop-ups and pilots that they're running, and I think the next step from there is like, will the capital now invest? Right?
Yeah.
So and I think that's where we're as a team right now. We're continuing to be challenged and challenge ourselves, which is how do we create more pathways for people in our community to be able to access that to access the resources that they need to be able to grow their ideas. And some of that includes partnerships that Raphael and Victoria are building with amazing organizations like Camelback Ventures, who shout out just announced their new fellowship, and also it looks like investing in coaching and training to help for our alumni to be able to learn sales and actually get coaching on how to write grants from other alumni who've been successful in securing those grants in the past. And I honestly think we're just continuing again to venture into that world, and I think the same skills. My hope is that a lot of the skills and the strategies that we have applied, which are notice, and double down on what's already happening in the community, will continue to kind of serve us well to build a different system to support the graduates of our program as they exit.
You raise a good point there, and I want to be sensitive to time, so we wrap soon. But I do think you make a good point. Like it's not that we don't want people to, with a powerful idea, to turn it into something real, and if they can quit their job and serve kids full time in that, to do it. So there is a ton for me personally of moral ambiguity with this focus, because we can't commit to taking someone all the way to profitability or to first revenue or to quit your job or to whatever your milestone is.
Right.
And so I think you raise a lot of these really interesting points. But to me, the thing that's been so cool is like that same principle of letting the alumni coach, that other experiment that you just referred to of alumni summits led by alumni, who's the best person in this community of now 1,000 who can figure out when it is time to quit, or who can run an organization dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion as it manifests for teachers or students. Like that community is now rich enough that if we ask those folks to give back, the expertise is much deeper than any like highly developed, investment pipeline focused on these sort of artificial milestones could be. But it doesn't mean it's any less scary because we can't look someone in the eye and say, we will get you that school,
right,
or we will get you that teacher training program, or we'll get you that early childhood space, because we're only at what we can do and what we are doing. And I think this turn that we're making allows us to say this with certainty: we can help you write and tell that first story.
Yep.
That is what we do, and we want to be the best in the world at that.
Absolutely.
And we can be that for anyone.
Yep.
And it's hard to say we're going to do less, but we're going to do it for anybody who wants us to do it for them.
Yep.
And we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to do it with our alums.
Yep.
And to me, like, I'll just come back around, like, to bring this back to the sabbatical. That was the biggest takeaway. If I could summarize what I felt reading Galliano as I traveled the continent, what I saw as I was trying to teach my kids, like, what is going on in the Strait of Magellan, and what is the real story of the people who inhabited this land, not the people who killed those folks and named it after themselves, was this concept of with versus to. And I continue to unpack that in my own journey, is that, this idea of delivering something to, whether it is early days of my own career and things that I'm continuing to unpack, that I will deliver a great school to you and your community, and you'd be crazy not to take it. There was no consideration of the people that I was serving. I didn't care about their input. This is just me speaking. I was convinced that I had the right answer.
Right.
And the pride and the privilege and the certainty and the hubris that animated that chapter of my life is something I don't want to repeat, and I don't want it to animate what I'm doing in the future. And I think what is so encouraging for me personally is that this turn you're helping us make, that we're doing together, is one that is animated by with. Like, we are trying to do our work with our alumni.
Absolutely.
And every time we interrogate that comes the power of structural racism, the power of the system to maintain status quo continues to be somewhat overwhelming, because it's deeper than you ever thought and more effective than you ever thought it was at keeping things the way they are. And the optimism and hope that comes from continuing to hammer away and making this our interpretation of with, not to, real, and interrogating it every time we see something that doesn't line up, and asking more people to interrogate it. It's also, that's the paradox for me. It's like, never felt more hopeful and more optimistic than when I'm in a room that's Tiny Camp or Essentials Camp or an alumni summit.
Absolutely, Matt. And I want to yes and that, like, as we, when I think about like 10 years from now podcast, I'm excited about a story of extending that continuum to, from the to with to by.
Yes.
And I think that's that is where I think we can completely redefine what investment, what equitable, accessible, diverse, rigorous early stage investing looks like. And I'm excited to be in this journey.
That's a good setup for what we hope to talk more about.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll wrap it. Start today. That's what the T-shirt says. We started today.